loved it. I was absolutely bricking it. I have never been so nervous for anything, even the World Cup final. I was, that first game at Watford Road, 18, literally, it was just awesome. There were a couple of other sort of points along the way that I now recognise as moments that were important for me and my journey. Like just looking at the mirror, suddenly thinking, I'm 24, I'm playing a World Cup final tomorrow. And I got momentarily really nervous. My experience with teenagers is awesome. And actually, if we give them the right stimulus, we provide the right opportunity, their brilliance shines through. Yeah, so that was a long-winded answer to say at 14, I recognised I wanted to do something with rugby.
Welcome back to the Not Quite Pod. Today we've got Lewis with us. Lewis, you just quickly want to introduce yourself and let everyone know a bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Well, I'm Lewis Moody. In a former life, I was a rugby player for 16 years. Had the privilege of doing that for some wicked teams: Leicester Tigers, Bath, England, the Lions, and at one stage got to play with a group of lads that were pretty handy, and that meant we won a World Cup. So that was good fun. But that was a long time ago now. And life has changed. I've got two young kids. Well, one's a 16-year-old who's left home and done his GCSEs. The other's 13, rugby mad, and the 16-year-old's a footballer. And you're thinking, why did I let him introduce himself? Because he's going to go on forever.
No, 100%. I always do it because I always think if I introduce, I'm going to do people a disservice, because at the end of the day, the individual knows themselves best and also knows what they want to be known for. So I never like to jump in and go, I'm going to do the introductions. Also, I know if I preempted my introductions, I'd end up fumbling my words. So that's one of the reasons why I give the responsibility over to guests. To be honest, pretty much summed up your sort of life this far. I really wanted to dive into, obviously, you starting out, as you started out, obviously, really in rugby. And I wanted you to speak on the journey with rugby. Like, did you always know that you wanted to be a rugby player? Was it something you came across and just fell in love with the sport? How did it all come about?
Great question. Well, I remember vividly the day that I fell in love with rugby. So I was 6 years old. So it's a strange and long time ago. It was 40 years ago, to tell you my age. And one of my mum's mates came over, and her son, his name was Matt Foster, and he was a little bit nervous about going to rugby. Is how I remember it anyway. And my mum asked if I'd go with him, and I did. And all of a sudden, I was made aware of this sport where you could run around, rain, mud, sun, snow, diving into people and throwing yourself around like a crazy thing. And as a 6-year-old, that appealed to me massively. So, yeah, I was hooked. You know, what's not to love about a sport that gets you outside all the time? You get to do with a good bunch of people. You get a ball in your hands, and more importantly to me as a 6-year-old, it was sort of a physical outlet for any of those little pent-up frustrations as an only child. You know, there's only so much sport you can do on your own in the garden.
I mean, also, what was the journey like? Did you know from quite early on that you wanted to try and go all the way up to the top, or was it just something that people spotted your potential and they went, Lewis, you can go all the way if you wanted to?
I don't think you ever know, right? There was definitely a point in my life where, so I always enjoyed rugby. It was the thing, and still do. Love it. It's an absolute passion of mine. But I think there's a point in your journey, as you put it, as a player, that you make a decision in your own head. You know, it's an internal decision. Some people will voice it, some people won't. And for me, that trigger was sort of when my dad, also Lewis, took me to Twickenham for the first time. We watched England v Wales, and Paul Thorburn, who was a brilliant fullback, who was the Welsh captain at the time. Wales were nowhere near as good as they are now, and England had a rousing victory. And as a 14-year-old sat in the old stand, I remember Dad asking me if I enjoyed it, which I did, and then his next question was, did you want to come back? And I remember exactly what I said. I said, I do want to come back. The next time I come back, I want to be playing. And that probably sounds ridiculously arrogant, but I can assure you I was always far from arrogant, almost the opposite, shy, could be almost introverted until I was comfortable in situations. Then I could be the opposite. But it was a sign of, I suppose, inner confidence. And there was no academies or anything like that when I was coming through. You just went through the age groups, joined the youth team at Leicester, which I did and loved. And then you progressed through it, and fortunate to have a few coaches that thought I was decent along the way, that could turn that inner belief into opportunity. And then I suppose when you're presented with opportunity, it's about taking it.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I got to play my first game for Leicester when I was 18, and I loved it. I was absolutely bricking it. I have never been so nervous for anything, even the World Cup final. I was, that first game at Welford Road, 18, literally a month or 3 months out of school, playing with all the lads I'd grown up watching, Rory Underwood and Dean Richards, Neil Back, Martin Johnson, blah, blah, blah. It was just awesome. And my school coach was in the changing room with me because he was also the first team coach at Leicester at the time. And he was like, mate, don't worry, just be calm. Just do what you always do. And he gave me 3 pieces of advice. He said, look, literally three pieces of advice, like tackle, tackle, tackle. It's like they are literally all the same. But in hindsight, the simplicity of his message was, if you just focus on one thing, actually everything else will take care of itself. And allowing me to focus on that one thing. I scored 2 tries in that game, I think, from the halfway line, which is pretty much the only time that ever happened in my career. But it was, so that was a long-winded answer to say at 14, I recognised I wanted to do something with rugby.
It's crazy. I think it's really interesting. Obviously, I didn't quite go to the heights that you did in my sport of swimming, but I had a very similar sort of eureka moment watching, because I went to London 2012 and I sat watching Ellie Simmonds win a silver medal. At that point, never swam competitively in my life, and turned around to my dad and went, I want to do that. And he went, you what? I was like, I want to do that. He's like, bloody hell. And to be fair to my parents, they were always a case of, if he wants to do it, we'll find a way for him to do it. And then obviously that was where the love of swimming come from. But it's always super interesting when I speak to sports people. A lot of people have that moment of the penny drops and you're like, I really love this sport, or I really want to get involved. And then they end up going all in. And I think the worst thing, which you probably see now working with teams and stuff, is particularly when I think of when I was younger, you go in almost too hard with training and everything because you want everything yesterday. Would you say that was something that you went through in terms of like really pushing yourself to the max when the inspiration was really strong?
Do you know what? No, I don't think I did. There were a couple of other sort of points along the way that I now recognize as moments that were important for me and my journey. Like, so when, for instance, when I was 16 or 17, and I had the choice to do either athletics or cricket in the summer term, because rugby was only one term at my school, although I played at Leicester as well. I decided to do athletics despite being good enough to play in the first team for cricket, because athletics would keep me fit for the rugby season. That was my thinking.
Makes sense.
So there were little triggers along the way, which at the time were just, I'm just making a decision. I suppose there are those moments in anyone's career, and it's interesting listening to you, visually watching something. For me, it was having to make a decision between sports. Actually, what was going to be more beneficial for me? But so I was never, I was never like, having played with Johnny Wilkinson and knowing how Johnny was, I was never, when we're talking about being all in, I was never like obsessively all in, but I was probably subconsciously all in, because my time, that decision alone, talking about doing athletics over cricket. Also, if I was in the garden and I was going to do anything, I'd pick up a rugby ball. And in fact, to the point where I'd pick up a rugby ball and I'd pretend to be 15 people, having a game, and 30 people, because I'd be the both teams, right? So I'd be going through it all in my head, which, subconsciously, unconsciously, I'm not sure which is the right term actually, but it was there and ingrained in me without necessarily, making active choices. But also, I think what benefited me and allowed me to develop into the sort of rugby player I became was being able to do athletics until I was 17 or 18. Also a bit of football, a bit of cricket, multi-sporting it literally all the way through. There was, my son is in a football academy, and there's a lot of early specialization that seems to be pushed that way in football academies. Thankfully, where he is, actually the coaches were really open to him doing and trying more sport, which I was grateful for because I'd seen the benefit of it myself. And I think, because you just don't know, right? As you mature and you grow as an individual, let alone a sports person, you never quite know where you're going to end up. So for them to have the foresight and the open-mindedness to do that, I was grateful. I was grateful for.
I think as well, the other big thing with that is obviously playing different sports, you develop different strengths because you're using different parts of your body, using different techniques and everything else. So sometimes I found that from the other sports that I'd be doing, that would play into swimming and be like, actually, that's really helped loosen up my shoulder or gain strength on this thing or that thing. So I think it's a really important thing for youngsters to say, like, you don't have to really have a specialist straight away. I mean, I started really getting into swimming quite late into the swimming world. So that was where I got quite a specialist quite quickly. But then through growing up, I was the same. I was playing football, horse riding, basketball, rugby. I was doing all of it just because I wanted to try all of it. It wasn't I wanted to be at the top. It was I just want to give it a go. The fact that I played wheelchair rugby at the age of 13 and a 25-year-old ex-veteran is flying at you in a metal wheelchair did scare the life out of me at the time, but you go with it.
Yeah. I think having when you talk about especially, I think it's okay to have a favorite sport. But that shouldn't be at the cost of trying others, because you just never know, right? You just never really know where your pathway is going to take you, what opportunities you're going to present yourself with. The Olympics have all those great, I forget what they're called now, but where they open up a university. Let's say I'm in Bath, they open up Bath University for all talented sports people to come and have a go and try out a sport and see if you find your niche.
Yep.
And for some people, it would just suddenly be a eureka moment that you get put in a situation, a little bit like me moving from, I was a centre in rugby language, which is in the backs, until I was 17. So a year after moving from, actually a coach moved me from the backs in the centres to the forwards. So I was on the flank, and I was like, no, I don't want to do that. No. You keep me out there with the ball and stuff. But it was a eureka moment for me. I was like, oh my goodness, someone had the foresight to present an opportunity to me. And had they not, I probably would have stubbornly gone, no, I want to be a centre. But you've presented me this opportunity. I've tried it, and I have absolutely loved it. And there's so absolutely, I'm there for finding a love of what you do, and but don't specialise too early.
But I must admit, coming back to your favourite sport of rugby, what obviously as you went through the ranks, and obviously you spoke there about one of your first games being the most nerve-wracking experience you've had, despite playing in a World Cup final. But did you have any like pre-match rituals to help you with your nerves, or was there anything that you had to do before a game?
Yeah, mine were quite obscure. And so they started small and they sort of escalated as well. I seemed to gather more and more superstitions the longer I played, to the point where I got so annoyed that I had so many superstitions. I was almost worried that if I forgot a superstition, that then became a superstition in its own right. Oh my God. So I had to cut them back. But the most common one that I pretty much stayed with my entire career was going to the cinema a night before a game. And I started doing that to sort of manage the nerves and the anxiety and the excitement that I had. And I suppose I used it as a form of escapism. It was just switch your brain off from the enormity of playing in front of 20,000 people at Leicester or 90,000 people at Twickenham, or couple of million when you're playing a World Cup final. And it just allowed the brain to switch off for those couple of hours. And actually, when I first started doing it, we'd steal a try jam, a try celebration from it. So if there was a sort of moment in the movie that we could replicate on the pitch, we did. I didn't score many tries, sadly, but the two other lads I went with got to use it really frequently.
I love that. That's great. And I think it's interesting because you hear now a lot with athletes of like their rituals and their pre-game setup is very much like home-based, no distractions, don't go out, kind of stay in. So it's quite nice to see that you kind of treat it as like a social thing with your teammates of like using it as an escape. So it's quite nice to hear because, as I say, a lot of the time when you hear of high-performance athletes, they're like locking themselves away or like they have to eat at certain times, do all this stuff, and then it's quite nice that it's quite a normal, it sounds silly, but it's quite a normal thing to just get, I'm going to go to the cinema.
Yeah, do you know, I'd never thought of it like that. And maybe at the time, actually, that's really what it was. And it didn't become a superstition, obviously, until I'd done it once. And then I liked it. And then I continued to do it. And then it got to a point where, well, hold on a minute, I have to now do it every game.
Yeah.
And to the point where, in the world, in 2003, when we're going night before the game, we've had the team meeting, we go to the cinema. They'd actually closed the cinema, and me and Steve Thompson, who'd gone, as routine before every England international for 2 years, were like, I don't think you understand the enormity of the situation that we're presenting you with here. We have to watch a film tonight. And the lady, bless her, she was like, look, it's not my decision. The projectionist has started editing or cutting up the film or something. Said, you're going to have to chat to him. So we wandered into this sort of dark room. He was a student, thankfully. And he'd arranged to go out and meet his mates. He was like, sorry, lads, I can't do it. I was like, told him the situation. Obviously, playing the World Cup finals tomorrow. He was an Aussie. So he could have really stitched us up. Well, I suppose he did to some degree. We did have to pay him, I think, around $500 Aussie dollars to stay and put it on. But he did. And do you know what? In my mind, Tomo corrected me the other day. It was Seabiscuit that we watched, the movie Seabiscuit with a horse.
Yep.
And, it was literally just me and him in there having a sort of candlelit evening for two with a massive packet of pick and mix and popcorn or whatever. It was really cool, actually. I won't put that as the sole reason as to why we won the World Cup, but obviously it was very, very important. But yeah, those rituals are bizarre, aren't they? I'm sure you picked them up, but they just come out of nowhere. And then I got to the point where I had to go completely the opposite way. It was almost go like cold turkey because I had, the night before, the ritual night before, and then it'd be the number of times I packed my kit bag and the meal that I ate before a game, my sleeping routine when I got up, what kit I wore before I trained on the pitch. So I'd always have to wear my match kit all day, no matter what. Sorry, all pre-game, no matter what the weather conditions. So if it was like 40 degrees, you normally just warm up in the t-shirt. I was match kit, so I'm fully padded up in 34 degrees, sweating my nuts off already. And the way that you put tape on, the order in which you put tape on. So literally they were accumulating at a rate of knots. And I did have to go cold turkey on it. But that's hard when you've become superstitious, or you've created these superstitions to then go, but what if I don't do that when I have a bad game? Obviously that's, it's lunacy, really, isn't it? That what you need to create is a process that is comfortable to you, that just allows you to go out and be in a comfort zone to perform. So rather than just creating more stress by accumulating more and more of these stupid superstitions that I managed.
I think it's really interesting because I'm trying to think of if I had any superstitions, and I didn't really have it, or pre-rituals, and I didn't really have any. One of my weird ones, it's not necessarily a ritual or anything like that, was I kind of knew how I'd performed based on my dad's reaction. Because what would often happen is I would get out of the pool and think I'd had a great swim. Dad would give me a shake of the head and be like, nah, you didn't quite cut it. And then I'd get out of the pool often and go, that wasn't the one. And Dad would be like, well, you've just PB'd by about a second and a half. And I'm like, I didn't think it was that great. And that happened time after time after time after time. So I sort of knew if I thought I'd had a bad one, I'd probably had half a decent one.
You were critical of your own performance by the sound of it.
To be honest, it was mostly, I think my big thing was I over analyzed everything. And that's something I still do to today. I'm one of those people that I'll over analyze everything. And then, particularly with swimming, it's very much like stay loose, keep your technique, don't overthink it and don't go too hard because that's when you'll lose your streamline. But all the time, I used to get caught up in the whole of, oh no, I want to go as fast as I can. And yeah, never worked.
It's funny that, isn't it? I wonder how many athletes, succumb to that, because I know listening to you talk, Ben, I definitely went through similar situations where you play a game and you focus always normally on the negative, right? So the things that you didn't quite get right, like you saying, maybe you were tensed up, or for me, I missed a tackle, or I missed a couple of tackles, or I was out of position, or I dropped a ball, and actually those are the things you focus on. And you might have only 2 of them in a game, and I might have had 300 interactions in a match.
Yeah.
So it's funny where the brain goes, and you're right. And because everything's videoed and can be analyzed now, actually, when you go back and watch it, which is something I used to do after the games, you can then sort of put your mind to rest a little bit, or you can dwell on it even more and just look at the things that went wrong and get into more of a negative headspace. So it's a funny world, the old athlete world, isn't it? I think because it can consume you in a good way and a bad way if you're not careful.
I think you have two types of people. You have the ones that love data and looking over what they've done, and then you have the ones that are like, look, tomorrow's another day. I don't care what I just did. I just need to do better next time. And I understand both parts of it. But talking about like analyzing and going through it, obviously being part of a World Cup winning team, what's your thought process there? How does that journey happen? Because obviously there's a big build up before it, but then on game day you're like, right, this is it. It's either a yes or a no. There's no if, buts, or maybe about it.
Good question. And do you know what? When you talk about things that have happened a long time ago, the same thing seems to go around in my mind in terms of the stories, the things you remember, and actually it gets harder and harder to really remember what genuinely happened. But I was chatting with someone the other day, and it reminded me, I had a visual memory of standing in front of the mirror the night before the game, and that team in 2003 under Martin Johnson and Clive Woodward, we'd been preparing for 4 years, although I'd only been a part of the squad since 2001. The team had been preparing for 4 years since they lost to South Africa in 99. And so I came into it when it was really it was on the rise anyway. And I came from a team at Leicester that had just won, back-to-back European titles and Premiership titles and all sorts. So I was used to being successful, winning was the norm. And it was only really, so that World Cup, we were the goal was to be the best team in the world prior to that World Cup, be the fittest team in the world and be the best prepared. And we were all three. So we were number one side in the world going into the tournament, across the board. Positionally, we were the fittest, one of, if not the fittest side in the world, based off of all the sort of stats and rankings that the S&C staff had accumulated off, the best players that were doing that were hitting the best targets in their positions. And so when we got to the World Cup and we moved through it, it wasn't, it was a little bit up and down like that, like any journey. It wasn't just, we went out and smashed everyone. Actually, we nearly, we were down by a couple of points to Wales at half time in the quarterfinal. We came back to win. We played well against France, actually, in rubbish conditions. I was on the bench in that. And it was only when I got to the World Cup final that I have any memory of being nervous. So any actual memory of standing in front of the mirror, I can remember it now, just literally looking in front of the mirror in the bathroom. The bathroom on my right hand side, there's this massive sort of big square mirror in Manly Pacific Hotel. and just looking at the mirror, suddenly thinking, I'm 24, I'm playing a World Cup final tomorrow. It suddenly dawned on me. And I got momentarily really nervous. And, I could in my body feel all the physical anticipation of the game always. I always felt that, but I'd never describe it as nerves. And that was the first time I felt it as nerves, when I looked in the mirror and thought, oh my God, this is what we've been talking about for the last 2.5 years. That's what we're going to do tomorrow. And we could win it. And everyone expects us to win because actually we're the best side in the tournament. And all those things go through your head. And I had the moments of doubt that crept in, around the way that I played meant often I could get on the wrong side of the referee, sorry. And so those doubts around giving away penalties, they all crept in. But we had a guy called Dave Redding. Sorry, Dave Aldred. Dave Redding was our strength and conditioning coach, who was brilliant as well. Dave Aldred was Johnny's kicking coach, and he also sort of became a self-appointed sports psychologist of the team. And he did some mental preparation stuff with us. He did loads of stuff with us, but like anything, it's finding what works for you. I believe in any situation, sport or life. And Dave talked about visualizing, your involvement in the game and actually finding a quiet space to really rehearse from, experience and understanding what you've done before, what your first involvements in the game are going to be. And I remember running the bath after having looked in that mirror. I looked at the bath. I was like, right, I'll run the bath, got in the bath and just started visualizing all the first involvements, closed my eyes, just running through everything. And it didn't suddenly transform. My body didn't suddenly go into complete relaxation or anything, but it reminded me that I was good enough to be there. And it reminded me, and it didn't necessarily mean that those same doubts wouldn't come back, because they did literally whilst I was on the bench, preparing for the game. But I knew that I had the tools to sort of deal with it and manage it from previous experiences and having been in finals and pressurized games. It's interesting, and it's difficult to sometimes really reflect. You speak to Martin Johnson, he's got a photographic memory. That's sadly not something I possess. But I tend to reflect what I remember is what I feel. And those feelings are so strong sometimes, especially when you're doing something you love and the pressure of potentially getting it wrong or potentially doing something really cool. They're strong emotions. So, and I can tell you a little bit more without going on too much about the World Cup, but those same feelings that I spoke about around self-doubt crept into my time on the bench. So when you're preparing to play sport, if you're starting, it's relatively easy because you know what you've got to do. You've got one position to cover, and you're starting at the start of the match, and that's an hour from when you arrive at the stadium. Yeah. When you're on the bench, you could be coming on, anything from the first 5 seconds or 90 minutes or extra time as it was for me, and trying to stay ready and prepared without burning yourself out mentally or physically on the sideline is so difficult. And I was always pretty enthusiastic. I don't know whether there's anything similar in swimming, but I was always a very energetic individual. So for me, keeping warm on the sideline, moving, always trying to keep my energy going, chatting with people. There was a huge danger that I was going to burn out massively. I don't know whether you had that in swimming.
It was definitely, so I think that the thing when you talk about that with swimming was obviously we're in a swimming meet. Everything's timed in terms of like you have the front crawl heats, then you have the breaststroke heats and so on. But so it really depends where your event lands as to how much waiting around you have to do. And one of the hardest things that people never, unless you did it, you never realized. One of the hardest things to do was keeping your energy levels up and keeping your hydration levels up, because swimming pools are notoriously hot. So you're dealing with the smell of constant chlorine, which then eventually gives you a headache. You're then dealing with, I want to eat something, but I don't want to eat too much because I've got a race. Then also I've got to try and stay on top of my game with my hydration because I'm losing fluids as I'm sitting on the side of the pool. Then also it's like, right, okay, I've also got to try and keep my mind switched on. So when I do have my event, I know what I'm doing. It's one of the, yeah. So I can imagine it's quite similar to with the sitting on the bench thing. That's the one thing I hated. I would love and it was always breaststroke, which was my event, was always at the tail end. So I'd never have that experience of, right, get in and get done, which I always wanted.
That's interesting to hear you share that, because I wouldn't have appreciated that or understood that as someone that was never a competitive swimmer, just did it for fun. So you can, like, you can relate to that, and that, being sat on that pitch, watching everything unfold in front of you and thinking there's a time that I'm going to have to be on there and doing it as well. And I suppose you would have known when that time was. Probably I didn't know when that time was, and that's the hard thing for team sports when you are in that. So you're in that sort of almost state of readiness for the entire match until you get on. And what I noticed and what I recall again, relates to the feelings that I had. Was I remember being really excited to get on the pitch. So excited that I was like, this is what I do. I know this is what I do well. I was like, actually, I should be on the pitch. And I remember thinking, as the game was going on, I was like, actually, you need to get me on the pitch, because I think I can make a difference at some stage here. So, and you go almost 360 from those set of feelings. And as the game seesawed, so we had Johnny Wilkinson and they had Elton Flatley, and literally the guys were kicking points left, right, and centre, and it was going from 1 point ahead to 1 point behind, 1 point ahead, 1 point behind.
Yeah.
And because the game was so close, as it moved on, I went from that, not overconfident, an individual full of self-belief that knew he could make a difference, to suddenly those gremlins creeping into the back of your mind, almost like sort of little spiders creeping up your head, to go, do you want to be the bloke that comes on and gives away a penalty and cost England the World Cup? It's literally that's what you're dealing with. And it's, I don't really recall how I managed that, other than to sit there and try and repress the negative thinking with some positive imagery in my mind and some positive self-talk, and also just getting up and distracting myself and being active. And as soon as I got the nod from, it would have been Dave Redding, actually, who would have been running the bench, then it didn't matter, right? I wasn't thinking anything. I was totally focused, and the best thing that could happen for me when you were coming on, or when you were playing any game, starting or being on the bench, was that you were involved straight away. And literally the first involvement meant the ball landed in my hands and I was into the game. And it was, so it was crazy to think that that was 20 years ago, and we had a reunion in November. And actually that reunion in November, when you go from prepare, play, review, prepare, play, review, prepare, play, review for every week of your life, all of a sudden that World Cup happened. We went prepare, play, nothing, never reflect on it ever again, other than when you're telling silly stories in front of people, or Clive's book, or you might meet each other every now and again and talk, but you never properly reflected on the game. And at the reunion, everyone got back together, the wives, partners, coaching staff. It was away from all the media and all that sort of stuff. It was one of the really most lovely experiences I've had in ages, and it was almost cathartic. It was like, guys, we should have done this 20 years ago, reflecting on it and appreciating what we did. And it brought up a lot of emotion for people. I think it was a really lovely thing to do, but bonkers to think that it was 20 years ago now.
It's hard. I think it's one of them things where you go, I can imagine in that mode of you're so focused, you're kind of like, I'm here to do a job. It's like I was going to mention earlier, I wondered if the reason why you didn't feel too anxious when you were going through the motions of the tournament was because your brain's automatically going, right, we've just got to do the job, get on to the next one, do the job, get on to the next one. And then when you get to the final, it's like, okay, we've got to do the job and win the World Cup. Okay, that's a little bit different to what we were doing before.
Yeah, and there's no job beyond it. That's just the job now. You are there, right? Yeah. So there wasn't another game. You're absolutely right. And the craziness around it is actually the most important game of that tournament wasn't the final. It was, we had a game in the pool against South Africa, who are arguably the best team, along with us and New Zealand in that tournament. And if we lost to South Africa in the pool, we would have ended up facing New Zealand. And no matter what anyone says, however good we were, playing New Zealand in a World Cup is a very different kettle of fish to play them anywhere else. And we'd beaten them twice in the build-up to this tournament, and away and at home. So we were confident. But so actually all the focus for the World Cup, all of our preparation, everything that we did in pre-season, all the analysis of all the games that we had, potential games, it was just about South Africa. We beat South Africa. We know we will avoid New Zealand until potentially the final. And we will end up hopefully playing, an easier run. So Wales and France, a little bit like everyone was chatting about, England's run into a World Cup final in football as well. It's not you as players, you want whatever route you can get, the best route, that's how you're going to get to the final. So, I can't remember what my point was in there other than that actually the focus was on South Africa, and all the energy and all the pressure and all the nerve were about beating South Africa. And almost once we did that, we sort of felt comfortable that we'd beat everyone else. And then, as you say, quite rightly, you're then thrown with this one massive moment, and that is literally it. You win or you lose.
The other thing as well is it's one of the biggest sports, particularly in Britain. It's one of the biggest sports. So then also, not only are you dealing with, oh my God, okay, we're at the stage of possibly winning the World Cup, but you've also got, which I was going to speak to you about, is I'd imagine it's like having the pressure of a nation on a team's shoulders. That's a completely different kettle of fish that I can't even speak on. Like the amount of pressure you have. Did you feel any of that, or did you just kind of go tunnel vision, just focus on the job at hand and get it done?
You know what? I think we were quite lucky because we were in Australia. Literally all that we got from the media was negativity from the Aussies telling us how old we were, and because a load of the boys were in their mid to late 30s, and it was Dad's Army, I think was the nickname. We just get Johnny was getting, or the team were getting grief because we could only kick drop goals apparently, which obviously wasn't true. And so we didn't necessarily get a feel for what was happening at home. And when you're in any sort of campaign mode, you're in a bubble. You're almost cut off from everything outside what you need to see and hear and focus on. And for us, it was the same, whether it was intentional or unintentional. We didn't have social media then. So, you had newspapers, the lads would sit around, someone would read the newspapers. I was at a stage in my career where I was like, I don't need to read the newspaper because I'm either looking for someone to tell me that I had a good game that I knew I'd done anyway, or I was looking for someone to tell me that I played better than I knew I had. So, which is highly, it's unlikely to happen. So I'm just going to feel worse for that. The weight of a nation, I don't think I ever experienced that. I felt the weight of expectation of my peers and wanting to, for me, the game of rugby and sport in general, team sport, was always about the other people. I loved doing it with my teammates, and I would actually say I loved my teammates that I played with as well. My emotion and my connection to what I did as a sport with a team was that sort of was that passionate, and sometimes why I ended up on the wrong side of my own emotions, being able to manage my own emotions, because those fairness triggers, or if something felt unfair to me, then I could react quite badly, which was a learning curve in itself. So getting to do that with what felt like a group of people that I loved was really cool and strange when you say it out loud, because actually really you're only together with that group of people for a really short and small piece of time, and then you're never together again as a collective unless you have a reunion 20 years later.
But it's interesting. I mean, not to that extent, but I always think in those situations where it's like an intense, like you're in a sort of an intense group where you're there to do something, or if you use a more everyday scenario, you're there to celebrate. So I always think of like a wedding or something like that. If it's really focused time where you're there together, all together, the interaction can feel like it lasted weeks when actually it was like a very small period of time. But it's because you're so dialed into it that you, as I can recall it so strongly, because that's what it was. That is exactly what it was.
Yeah. it was the intensity of it. You're right, actually, the intensity of the connections that were created in moments. I'd say in battle, but that sounds a bit theatrical, but that's how I feel about it, or that's how I felt about it. Absolutely.
What was it like coming home from battle?
I don't know how to answer that really. It was weird because I went as a 24-year-old, just fairly normal bloke, as we all did. And all of a sudden we came back and we were asked to go and see the Queen, the Prime Minister, to do some TV show with, I forget the name of the host now. And they had a whole host of celebrities in attendance. And then we're on Sports Personality, and we're like, we're just some dudes playing rugby. And we were suddenly sort of thrust, and certain individuals, obviously like, Johnny and Mike Johnson, who maybe didn't yearn for the spotlight in any way, shape or form, were thrust into it even more aggressively. And, I think for, Johnny's spoken about the challenges that he had with that, but it was interesting for all of us. And some of us sort of took it in our stride. Obviously, I was a small part of that team, so I had none of the sort of fandom or of a Johnny Wilkinson, but to be sort of in and around it was really weird. But it only lasted a year, and then very quickly after you got all these invites to all sorts of dinners and TV shows, and it's this is cool and this is quite exciting, and it'd be really easy to sort of run away with that. And I'm sure there were times when I did, as a young man, having smoke blown up my arse by everyone, it'd be hard not to, right? But literally, I remember after a year, it just suddenly disappeared, and it was like, and we were back to normal. And the weird thing about the playing in the World Cup was the weekend after we were playing. I was playing Bath v Leicester at Welford Road. There was no. Bearing in mind that it's not just the World Cup campaign, which is around 8 to 9 weeks, I think. The build up to the campaign is 3 months. You've got a whole pre-season where you're together, so you are absolutely shattered. But the rightly or wrongly, the club I had all my formative years with was Leicester, and you knew if you weren't at Leicester playing, that there would be someone else good enough playing in your place that would potentially nick your place, whether you won a World Cup or not. So we all had the mentality we wanted to get back and play as quickly as possible. And ironically, actually, that first game, it turned out I'd carried a stress fracture in my foot all the way through the World Cup. And it was only in that, it was the second game back against Stade Francais, someone stood on my foot, and I had it x-rayed whilst I was out there, and thankfully, touch wood, they found nothing. And it turned out I had a stress fracture in my navicular, which is the main loading bone. And playing Stade Francais, someone stamped on it to the point where literally it opened up completely, and I couldn't walk for weeks. Just in those moments, if that had happened during the World Cup and someone had stamped on that stress fracture, all of a sudden that would be my World Cup over. So I consider myself really lucky that I even made it through it, because I then had basically a year and a half out of playing at all, 2 weeks after the World Cup final.
Fate's a strange thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is weird. It is weird.
What about in terms of, like, obviously you got to pretty much the very top, particularly in international and club. What advice would you give to young rugby players that are wanting to get to where you've got to?
I think anyone that's young, that are coming into the game, whether teenagers or whatever, would be emphasised what we said earlier is, don't specialise too early. Find a love, absolutely. Find a passion, and if you have a favourite, also that's cool. But don't let that distract you from trying other things, because athletics, cricket, hockey, everything for me, all of those sports played a part of making me the athlete that I was able to become and the skills that I was able to acquire. And I see it in my son as well, where and both my kids, what they're achieving in their sport, relates massively to all the sport that they sort of throw at themselves. And the other thing would be, don't don't get too carried away with all the weight training and all that sort of stuff. One of the things I always like to reflect on is without making it about me, but I was a skinny kid, and I found it hard to keep weight on. And so that meant I had to work on other aspects of my game, whether it was speed, skill, fitness, and those three things, I think, probably stood me apart and allowed me to be able to play the game despite being not the biggest player. So I would always say, if you're good enough, you will be put on those programs, those pathways in the gym and on those academy systems. If you're good enough, you'll find all that. But, being quicker to the ball than someone that's bigger and stronger, you'll still win the ball first if you're there quicker. Being more skillful than that guy that can run through everyone at 14, you'll catch up with him at some stage, and you'll have the skill set to dominate. And being fitter, being able to get around the park longer and do it better for longer, those would be the things that I would say if you wanted to focus on anything, it'd be the skill element and the speed.
Obviously, as well, you're a dad yourself, and both of your boys are quite involved in sport. And obviously, you mentioned that one of them's in a football academy. Do you think for young athletes now, that where they've got all the academies and they're getting into sport younger, do you think there's almost too much pressure on young kids getting into particularly like high level competitive sport? Obviously, there's some great lower level clubs that it is just all about fun and learning the sport. Whereas when you go to the slightly higher, more well-known clubs, it can get very heavy very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. It almost becomes like, professionals at the age of 7. There's no such thing as a professional 7-year-old or 8-year-old or 9 or any 8-year-old until you're a professional. You are just playing a sport because, it should be fun. It should be fun. And I like your question because, I think, watching both my kids come through, you see a mix of kids and parents as well, and expectations and pressures. And I probably got that wrong as well as a parent, as we were coming up. I remember having a conversation with one of the lads in the car. And after any session, I'd like to have a chat with him and say, how's the session gone? And, what did you do well? What did you do better? And he got quieter and quieter after a couple of journeys. And I remember asking him, I said to him, because I was almost getting annoyed that he wasn't talking to me. And then you realize that that's your own sort of parental frustration, nothing to do with him. So I asked him, I said, do you mind me asking you questions after training? To which he said, I'd rather you didn't, because it makes me feel like I need to answer it in a certain way. And I was like, so unconsciously, I was applying pressure to him. It definitely wasn't my intention. I just genuinely wanted to know how he was doing. And maybe there was a bit of the parent in me that was going, wow, I saw this and you could probably do that better, which is not my place. Right? That's the coaches. Yeah. I don't know what a coach is trying to talk to them, especially with football. I don't know anything about football. But it was a revelation to me. I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I hadn't even considered, what that was like. And ever since then, we've had our conversations are much better. Obviously there's a time as the kids get older and become teenagers and into their later teens where, some reflection on the game is beneficial, but really as a parent, certainly what I saw my job is that if my kids love something, whatever it is, and whatever their ambition is for it, whatever their goals, however lofty, there's another conversation I had. It was like, I want to play for England. I was like, okay. And I think I said, well, do you not think that's a bit too, do you not think you should make it a bit more realistic? And I went away and we had a conversation around it. I can't remember exactly what we said after that, but I distinctly remember going up to the room and going, what on earth am I doing? It's not my position to tell someone what they should or not aim for. Absolutely. You should aim for the stars, right? If that's what you want, you aim for it. And it's my job only to support you. And, along the way, you will figure out what's possible and you will figure out where you're going to get to, and whether it's just because you love it and you're just going to play for fun, whether it's because you love it and you want to make a career of it, you're good at it, and therefore you require a slightly, not that it's not going to be fun because it should be, but it requires a slightly different mindset and approach to it. So parenting has given me a huge insight into the pressures that kids and teenagers come under in this modern world, and not only just from sport, but the expectations. Social media adds to that, the image of sport, and what you should look like, you should be doing, what you should be wearing. It's tough being a teenager, and teenagers are awesome, right? I had my only experience with teenagers. I didn't drift into that negative mindset around, oh, they're all going to be grumpy. My experience with teenagers is awesome. I genuinely, whether it's my own or coaching teenagers on a rugby pitch, is that they are great. And actually, if we give them the right stimulus, we provide the right opportunity, their brilliance shines through. And like all of us, they're at a stage where we're trying to understand our emotions and how to manage them. And I'm 46, and I'm still trying to figure that out.
But I love that, because you've just shown as well that I do think parents get a bad rep as well, because if you're not, I always say with anything, if you're not exposed to it, you're not going to know it. But there, you showed like you had the sort of foresight of going, hang on, let me have a think about this, and then go to your son. Are you okay me asking you about this, or do you want me to change it? Which a lot of parents wouldn't have the foresight to. And I don't think there's necessarily, it's a hard one, because I do have that belief that you only know what you know, and you can only then make informed decisions from what you know. Because I always think, like my dad my dad would be like, oh, you could have done this better. You should have done this. You should have done that. But it's just because that's what he grew up doing. But all come from sports, so it can be a very different conversation. So it's really nice to hear that was what came from that conversation, really.
Yeah, I loved what you said there about you only know what you know, right? It's not that I don't think anyone does it with malice. It's just that you don't know, or you replicate what happened to you, and unless we seek out new ways, there's a really interesting chap out there called Richard Shorter. Have you come across Richard? He does the
no, I haven't.
So his website's called The Non-Perfect Dad, but it's basically about parenting in sport, and he's got some really interesting information blogs in there, and he was a good catalyst as to when I started questioning myself about my own parenting, and not even just with the sport, but how I expected to parent both kids the same. So because I'd had one, obviously it will relate that I'll be able to parent them exactly the same and expect the same outcome. Obviously, I couldn't have been more incorrect if I'd tried. So I just wanted to mention him, because he's quite, if anyone's sort of going down that route of, well, I've got a sporty kid, I'm not sure whether I'm doing all the right things, or what are the right things, then he's just got a good website that will at least make you ask some interesting questions of yourself, and there's some quizzes on there that you can try as well, which are quite cool.
Amazing. I'll also link it below, but I wanted to change topic quite a bit, because I wanted to speak to you as well about your journey with, I can never say it, ulcerative-colitis. Is that correct? I can never get it right. I can, no matter how many times I rehearsed it, can never get it right. So I'll just let you speak on it.
There's plenty of words that I can't say. Don't worry about that. Ulcerative-colitis.
That's it. There you go.
Yeah. It's a mouthful, but so I was ulcerative-colitis, for anyone that doesn't know, it's basically bowel disease. It's a form of bowel disease, and you can get it severely, and it's a spectrum, right? So you can get it where you just get flares every now and again, and you can get it where you have to have your whole bowel, intestine, all sorts removed. And it can be awful, and in its worst case is Crohn's. Crohn's is probably the worst. Again, there'll be a spectrum of degrees of severity on that, but so I was diagnosed in 2005, so a year and a half after we won the World Cup, and I had no idea, never heard of it. Like most things or illnesses or diseases, you don't know anything about it until you're suddenly affected by it, or someone you love is affected by it. And so basically I started losing a lot of weight. Whenever I went to the loo, I was losing a lot of blood. So, I go, when I sit down, I go to the loo, basically it was like was like, I don't know what it's like to be sort of prodded with a sharp, pointy stick, but that's what it felt like. It felt like someone was jabbing me in the stomach. And over, I suppose, over the course of a couple of weeks, I allowed it to continue, told my wife. It was obviously challenging being a sportsman, trying to disguise that and keep that from the coaches and your teammates, because it's embarrassing as well. Yeah. And I left it probably a month or so, as far as memory serves. And then Annie sort of eventually said, right, go and see a doctor. So I did, saw him, and he immediately diagnosed it as ulcerative-colitis. And basically it's ulcers of the colon. So whenever your stools or anything passes past it, creates stomach pains and cramps, and can cause the parts of which can basically cause it to just decay. And thankfully mine never got that severe. I didn't have to have any removals. I didn't have to have a bag, a colostomy bag. But it got so bad that at points I couldn't be more than 2 feet away from the loo. And actually some points, literally, if the toilet was there, it would be too far for me to be able to, get your belt off, your trousers down. And so it was a tough time. And I didn't tell anyone other than my wife. Did tell mum and dad. And I felt at the time it would be another reason that the coaches, bearing in mind I'd just been out for a year and a bit with the stress fracture and the navicular I had after the World Cup. This was then going to be another thing that was going to keep me out again. I was like, no, I can't tell anyone. Yeah. And that was more stressful. So the more stress, as I found out after, stress plays into its hands as well. Yeah. So, but it's really interesting how stress manifests itself in physical responses in the body, right? Whatever it is, alopecia and colitis and all the various other different things, psoriasis, and it affects all of them to different degrees. And for me, absolutely, it impacted my colitis. And I suppose what's the point that I got to with it? I got to the point where I was on painkillers, enemas. So I had to take a steroid enema, which was in like this foam tube. So I had to carry these things around in my kit bag, and then you go to the loo, find a quiet moment, you have to stick this tube up your ass and then essentially administer a steroid pre-game. So that was embarrassing. You never know what people say if they see you doing it. Obviously the medic, I told, actually I can't remember whether I did tell the medics at that stage. Anyway, it got to the point where I had to tell someone, and the irony of it was when I told the coach, so I'd waited a long time. When I told the coach, he had something very similar. And as soon as I started talking about it with him, it just completely alleviated the burden, because I felt wrongly that, I'd be judged, I wouldn't be picked because I'd be a liability. I was losing weight constantly. It was hard enough. I explained it was hard for me to keep weight on anyway. And, colitis makes it very difficult to keep your weight on. But as soon as I started talking to them, he then said, well, I've had this. Why don't you chat to such and such? And we did. And we built a plan up with the medics and the staff at Welford Road and at England. All the medics were awesome. They always were. And it allowed me to get through it. And I consider myself, very lucky that actually sport gave me a mindset, because probably up until, 2005 when I was diagnosed, I probably had 7 or 8 operations, maybe 9, 10 at that point. So it had given me the mindset of, it's just another thing to sort of deal with and overcome, rather than it being a barrier to forward movement. It was just, okay, how do I get over this? And I very quickly learned that I couldn't do it on my own. I was doing that very badly. Although I tried for a long time, probably half a year, maybe. And eventually told the coaches, told the medical team, it started to get easier. The stress reduced. I still had to carry a spare change of clothes in the car, because traveling from home to the training ground, I had numerous accidents on the way. So I'd have to leave early to make sure I was in before everyone else, because, whether anyone knows or not, that's still embarrassing. If you shit yourself, you don't really, at the age of 26, 27, you don't really want to be broadcasting. And so there are all sorts of things that I had to change in my approach to it. And the main thing that I changed that made the real difference was my nutrition. I'd come through the amateur sort of era. My first season was the first professional season, but there was still a big amateur hangover. We did a lot of drinking back then. Diet was important, but it wasn't really until that sort of 2002 stage with Clive that it really ramped up. But because of all the operations, I'd had a lot of drugs put into my body, all sorts of, drugs to knock you out, anti-inflammatories, painkillers, steroids, etc., etc. The list was endless, and not including supplements. I just got to the point where I felt like a walking medicine cabinet with all the stuff I had to take, to play, and then all the stuff I had to take to be fit with colitis. I just went, nah, I'm not doing it anymore. I stopped pretty much everything cold turkey, all the pills for colitis, all the pills and anything I was taking for playing and supplements. And I still kept the enema because I knew that was one thing that if I flared really badly with my colitis, that would stop it. So I used that to manage it. And then I just went sort of cold turkey on my diet and stripped everything out, all protein shakes, all supplements, went oily fish and rice to start with. And then gradually, there was a really good book that my mum found actually, and it was something like, this isn't the right word, but it was no pain, no gain. It was something linked to that phrase that I can't remember. But it was pivotal to making a difference because it gave a list of foods that irritate your bowel and can cause problems. And so I went through that list so I started with oily fish and rice and did that for a week. It was all right. I actually didn't mind it too much. And gradually tried to just stick to water. And what I found for me, and I'll share this, but I know, having spoken to hundreds of people with colitis or Crohn's or whatever, it is totally unique. People do find a way, but it is often, there's not a uniform way of managing it. So for me, this worked. But, the things that I really struggled with, if I introduced any form of powdered supplement, that went straight through me. Red meat in particular went straight through me. Any spicy food, that's not maybe a surprise. Caffeine, alcohol, they were awful. Nuts, things with skins on, so including fruit. And they were the major ones. And it was like a revelation because I'd like gradually reintroduced it. I'd have like lamb. I'd be like, oh my God, this is amazing. Next day I'd be like sat on the loo for an hour. I'd go out and have a couple of pints. Next day I'd be absolutely broken. So it was an interesting learning curve. But again, sport gave me, thankfully, because there's lots of people I've met that haven't had that background in sport that have really struggled to adapt and go, okay, even if I know that's what I need to try, I haven't got the discipline, or I haven't got the consistent discipline, or I just can't be bothered, even to that degree. So I do consider myself fortunate that almost the life that I grew up in allowed me to be able to manage it and cope with it and see it as something that I'm just going to figure out a way of overcoming it. And also I had a really brilliant group of people around me, some medics and support staff, family and a wife, and people that were prepared to really figure out how we could make it work. And it did. And, I'm pretty much symptom free now. So what's that? Nearly 20 years on.
Wow.
And I've probably been symptom free for, when I say symptom free, almost symptom free for the best part of 10 years, maybe.
Wow. And do you have to keep up the same diet and everything else even today, or have you been able to reintroduce stuff?
No, I couldn't tell you scientifically, I couldn't tell you anything other than, that it timed with my focus on my diet, cutting out all supplements, all painkillers, all drugs, and doing that for best part of 5 years, to a point where I suddenly just woke up one day and went, I don't actually feel like I even have colitis anymore. And then, of course, as soon as you think that, you go and do something, and then you suddenly realize that, oh, okay, so there is still something there. But I literally to the point now where it is so rare for me. You're talking like once, maybe every 6 months that I might have an urge or rush to get to the loo quicker than I imagined. Actually, there was one time going to the train station a couple of months ago where I was in a speed waddle because the quicker I moved, the more I needed to go to loo. But if I didn't go quicker, I knew I wasn't going to make it. So thankfully, I saw this like Portaloo, where it's a building site. I was like speed waddling. Anyway, but other than that, I consider myself symptom free now. So my diet. Your question was, my diet is varied. I don't drink much now anyway, probably because of that. But I still do have a drink. I still let my hair down sometimes. I probably drink more coffee now than I ever have in life outside of sport. And touch wood, that doesn't affect me. Red meat and things, I don't eat a huge amount of red meat, to be honest, again, because of the diet that I created, but I can have red meat. So I suppose I'm just conscious now I'm more conscious of what I put in my body, which I wouldn't have been prior to being diagnosed.
I think it's probably, as an outsider looking in with friends that have had similar conditions or just similar difficulties, I think as someone that doesn't have any dietary difficulties, I always think the whole stripping back diet thing, like you just said, it's that whole thing of, I don't even think, I come from a sporting background. I don't think I'd have the discipline to strip back my diet. I like food too much. And so I'd be constantly going, but I want it. I really want it. So I can't imagine like the mental strength that takes.
Well, do you know what? It didn't seem that hard at the time, because the flip side of it was that I was gonna be really ill for a long time, but I remember the doctor saying as well, like, you're going to be on drugs for the rest of your life, and there was no other option. It wasn't like, well, there must be something else I can try. But no, doctors are very matter of fact, aren't they? It's like an operation or drugs. That's basically all that's going to ever sort you out. Yeah. So I it did take a good while for me to get to the point where I needed to try it, but I just think, whether it's an individual characteristic or whether it's sport or just having good people around you, if you can make your life better by focusing on something and doing it, then I suppose my mind is like, why wouldn't you do it and at least give it a go? And I think I was maybe surprised in myself that I was able to stick to it so diligently for so long, because also I love it. Right? I love sugar and fizzy drinks and sweets because of my time at the cinema every night, every week, multiple times a month. So that was the hardest time was then. But equally, for when it was at its worst, I didn't really go to the cinema because I wasn't confident that I would be safe. Ironically, I never had other than one game when I was tackled particularly hard in the stomach.
I was going to ask.
That was the only time I had to actually go to Dean Richards, who was a coach at the time, and go, Dean, you're going to have to take me off. He was like, why? It's like, I really need the loo. He's like, you can't come off because you need the loo. I hadn't told him. And I didn't even know, I don't think, at that point. It was before I was diagnosed. So, I did come off and I didn't go back on. But that was the only time. And I put that down to excess caffeine prior to the game. And that was probably the stimulus that triggered it. But otherwise, I was really lucky. Training and playing, it was almost like a distraction, So that stress element of your body that takes over, actually, when your mind was at complete peace and ease and just doing, it didn't think about it. So it changed my perception of how you manage stuff, and how important the mind is at controlling so many aspects of your body. That was the first time I think I'd ever really appreciated it.
That's super interesting, because it's something I saw the other day of, like, someone asked the question, what do surgeons do in long surgeries about going to the toilet? And they said, we never really do, because we're so dialed in on what we're doing. And then I'm imagining it's sort of a similar thing. Your body goes, okay, we're in work mode, for want of a better word. During work mode, we can't go to the toilet. So it just switches off. And I find that part of our brains so strange, because you think it's a bodily function. How do you can't just poof and it works. But even like I always say to my partner, she's like, I don't know how you manage with like toilets and everything. You seem to be able to hold it for age and everything else. And I'm like, it's down to having a disability, because you just go, I don't know where the nearest accessible loo is going to be. So it's just a skill that you develop. It's really weird.
Yeah, that's interesting. I not thought of it like that. And I'd be, I would just check my words, as in my own words, because I'm also conscious to say that they're, people dealing with these types of illnesses, that like it is out of your control as well.
Yeah.
But I'm not trying to say that, if you've got a stronger mind, you'll suddenly be fine. Of course, that's not the case. But it does interest me, the role of the mind in illness, just exactly as you highlighted there, is actually it does have a part to play. And understanding. So I looked into a friend of mine mentioned a course that's happening at the minute. It's called Coaching for Physical Intelligence. So, a real understanding about the body and the mind and how they connect. And I've enrolled myself on that because I'm like, I wish I'd had that when I was 25 and dealing with colitis, because it probably would have been really beneficial.
I mean, you hit the nail on the head, and 100%. Like, I think it's interesting how the brain and then the body can sort of support you where you need it. But then the other thing, I think, like as say you mentioned earlier, there's been a big movement towards more holistical health and looking at, like you say, doing things like stripping back your diet if you've got a dietary issue. And I believe there's so much more that we can do with traditional Western medicine and then holistical medicine, but everyone's it's always got to be two camps. And I'm like, that's where someone introduced me to the concept of functional medicine. And I'm like, that makes perfect sense. Why can't that be where we end up? But the response is either take a painkiller, take a pill, or have a surgery. There is a part to play to the mind and natural remedies, because they can work. Not all of them, but they can certainly work.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. What did you say? Functional medicines? Yep,
functional medicine. It's the combination of holistical medicine and Western medicine. So it's like taking the best bits of both. And one of the guys who came on the pod said it, and I went, that's exactly where I would like to see, because I definitely think there's a place for both.
Charlie, I love that terminology, because I did. My wife and I have a charity called Lewis Moody Foundation. Every year we do a challenge around the world, and a couple of years ago we went to the Amazon rainforest to live and survive in the jungle for 6 days, and it was fascinating. The guy in there who's this jungle expert who teaches all the sort of people around the world how to survive in a jungle. He was going around all the sort of plants and fauna and showing us and cutting things off and rubbing it. And like one thing smelled exactly like deep heat, and another one was a derivative of paracetamol. So what you're just describing and what I experienced was actually medicine is just a really steroided version of the natural world, right? So everything comes from, well, I say everything, I'm sure that's not true, but the majority of things come from something that was natural and has just been enhanced and steroided as I mentioned.
100%. I mean, I was going to come on to it anyway. So tell us a bit more about your foundation and what it was set out to do.
Yeah. So we set up the foundation in 2014 after I met a young lad called Joss Raleigh-Stark. He was a really promising, talented young rugby player. He's diagnosed with a brain tumor. Sorry, he wasn't diagnosed with a brain tumor. He was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. And off the back of meeting Joss, we and getting to know him over the course of a year and a half, and his family and everyone else, he was a super lad. And I got to take him to Twickenham. We did numerous things with him over the year, and he sadly passed away. And because I just retired, I had obviously time on my hands, and having met him and his family, it just focused our charitable energy. And so we went from, well, we didn't change, we still supported other charities, but we focused all our attention on one. And we wanted to, because Joss died of a rare form of cancer, we wanted to focus it on a cancer charity that needed support. And at the time, and still, brain tumors were the biggest cancer killer of under 40s and children, bar none, yet received less than 2% of all cancer funding. So we were like, okay, we're in. It might not be the cancer that killed Joss, but if it's a cancer that affects more children and more under 40s than any other, and there's so little funding going into it, surely we can help make a difference there. So for the last 10 years, it was our 10th anniversary this year, we've been raising money for the brain tumor charity, basically, and we fund specific projects related to the brain tumor charity. We do it by fundraising, dinners, or events, and the events normally involve me going to some part of the world with a group of people doing something pretty cool and a little bit crazy. You know, our first trip was to the North Pole with my good mate Alan Chambers, who's a polar explorer and an absolute legend. And I was like, mate, we're going to do some challenges for this foundation I've just started. He's like, that's a great idea. I was thinking, like, you know, maybe something in the UK, land of indigenous race. He was like, we should go to the North Pole. So that is definitely more dangerous than I was ever considering. I wasn't even near that. And we did it. I took two of my World Cup winning mates, actually, Danny Grewcock and Josh Lucy, and Alan took some of his Marine buddies. And so we did it half for the foundation, half for the Royal Marine Charity. And off the back of that, we just developed more challenges, and we went to with Wyco, who were our sponsors for the first 4 years. We went to Charlie and Gary, who were just bonkers and brilliant people. We went to Costa Rica, South Pole as well, Vietnam and Cambodia. We did the Amazon. We've been around the Alps. I mean, there's just so many. Actually, I can't even remember. I can't remember them all.
That's crazy.
We're off to the Sahara in November, which will be fun.
Wow. How do you go? I've always wondered, because you see these people doing these like expeditions to raise money. How do you go about setting one of them up?
As in the actual challenge? Well, I suppose you create the idea first of all. You come up with the idea. So I sit down with Al and go, what are we going to do? And he'll go, well, we go to the North Pole. That's obviously a very unique and bespoke challenge, and you can't just call up Charity Challenge or any of the other global charity organizations. So that was very much Alan led, and he uses his contacts to point us in the right direction. But once you've come up with a concept, you then sit down with someone like Alan and someone like Charity Challenge, and Charity Challenge have done a number of our trips along with Gain and Marshall, and we sit down and say, well, we want to do this, can we make it harder, can we make it easier? They're like, and they come back and tell us whether it's really possible. So last year we did the Western Front Way, which was really cool. So it was one of my passions is the First World War. So we did 1,000 miles. It was just under 1,000 miles in the end from the southernmost point of the Western Front from 1918 the northernmost. Southern? Which way around is it? Southern. That's the bottom. Southernmost point to the northernmost point. And that was wicked, because it encompassed raising money for the charity, taking in some of the First World War sites that I'd never seen, which was phenomenal. Doing it with people that had a similar interest, but also a reason to do it. And it was just it was a great trip. And actually, the Western Front Way is a charity in its own right now as well. So it's a route that people can go and do, and I'd highly recommend it, because it is a brilliant route and takes in, French, German, British, Commonwealth, just it's an experience. And if you like, Great War history, then I'd recommend it. I've gone off on a complete tangent.
No, it's fine. I say I love the sort of how many of them you've done and all the different locations, and then obviously the beauty of being able to loop it in with a personal interest as well. It's really interesting. And I think, I say, for me, it's just, you always see, I say, these bigger expeditions, and I didn't even know that these type of organizations exist to help you organize that. In my head, it sounds terrible. I never thought about it. I was like, I thought they just happened. And of course they don't just happen.
No, well, I mean, do you know what? They do just happen, because, these organizations have a list of stuff that you can just go and sign up and do. And, for me and Al, when we take people on a challenge, we like to make it a little bit more unique and bespoke, so that they feel like it's a real one-off. But sometimes it's just an expanded version of what you can go and just pick off a website. So in some ways it is simple. In other ways, depending on the level of the challenge that you want to take on, not that simple, because you need someone like Alan who knows his onions. We have unbelievable people that lead these trips. Alan is one of them. Had another friend of mine that's led it as well. But also you have the guides on the ground who really know the country. We have a medic and a doctor. So we're always really, really well supported. But there's nothing like taking yourself out of your comfort zone. I have to admit, and I've never felt more out of my comfort zone than when I was in the North Pole for the first time.
I was going to say, that one's got to be up there, because that was not one that many of them do.
It was mad. It was so mad. It really was. So everything from the plane ride where you sit in this, felt like a 1980s Russian Antonov. And, on landing, one of the wheels collapsed on the plane. So you're sliding down the runway. It's not a runway. It's a cleared snowfield. So you're landing on ice. It's a floating ice sheet, the North Pole. And then you come to this base, which is essentially 4 tents. And then there's a couple of helicopters, and depending on what you're doing, some people do the North Pole Marathon. Some people try and go from the coast to the pole, or the coast to wherever. Some people try and do 1 degree, 2 degrees. So we were only doing 1 degree. So you basically get there, you have a night there, and then they take you in this helicopter and drop you in the middle, literally in the middle. And then they leave, and there is nothing other than white in every direction.
That's terrifying.
It was momentarily terrifying, I have to admit. But then you realize you've got a job to do, right? You've got to get your kit going, you've got to get your skis
sport
on,
mode.
you've got to get moving so you don't get, sport mode, kicks in. Let's get there. Let's get warm. Let's get going. Yeah.
And then changing to sort of what you're now doing now, tell us a bit about your working with young athletes and working in performance coaching, and how that all came about.
Well, I suppose it came about in hindsight now from when I finished playing. A friend of mine now offered his services as a life coach, basically. So I just retired from playing, and I wouldn't have really even heard of a life coach unless I'd come across Jonathan, and off the back of that, then I got a business coach. When we started our own company and then our own charity, and having those two individuals support me at a time when I thought I was invincible, because I was an ex-England captain. Obviously, life's going to be easy outside of rugby, and actually it was anything but. And really, I suppose what it made me realize was that I absolutely needed someone to challenge my thinking, to ask me questions, and for me to be able to move forward without, completely derailing myself. They were pivotal. Yeah. And, I ran a company for a short while, 10 years, that employed young sports coaches, young rugby coaches, and put them into state schools. So I started mentoring them, which then led into mentoring different athletes. That then led me to get a qualification and look at qualifications in coaching and what that meant. And that's basically where I found myself now, sort of 3 or 4 years on, working with individuals around the world, which is pretty cool, and not just in sport. But I have to admit, sport is always and always will be my passion. I have a lived experience, which sometimes in coaching isn't always a benefit, but with young athletes, it can be sometimes. But really, it's just trying to help them understand what it is that they've come to coaching for, what success looks like at the end of it, and how I can support them to get there. And that part of that journey is me in a nutshell. Is what I love in life, is supporting people. I told you about loving my teammates, being a part of something. When I first started playing, and when I left the game, I thought I had all these unbelievable skills around leadership, and I don't know. Just people kept telling me how easy life was going to be. You've just got such a natural skill set. But until you actually realize what your skill set is, and mine is working with people, and investing in people and wanting to support people, until you really fundamentally realize what your skills are and where you can apply them. It's a challenging world out here. So that's where I'm at now. I've just launched an online community, actually, and with Safe Space Global, which is trying to make coaching more accessible to people as well. I think often it's seen as it has so many names, right? exec coaching, life coaching, business coaching, and
Yeah.
performance coaching. It's really confusing. So yeah, safe space, just an opportunity to make it more accessible to people. So if anyone is interested, there's you can look me up on Safe Space Global or under KBM Inspired, which is my own company.
And I'll, of course, link Lewis's stuff below as well if you do want to check out his coaching. But I was just going to ask as well, I think one of the big challenges with coaching, just as a last point on this, is a lot of people see it as like a, not a witchy woo's the wrong word, but it's very much like you can go one or two way with coaches. It can be like, oh, you can do anything, you're bulletproof, but it turns into this massive motivational speech where actually a lot of coaches, it's about drilling down and getting an understanding of the individual rather than, yes, the inspiration side of it's there. But I feel like with coaching, if you go down more what the stereotype is, it's all very much, oh, all they do is a motivational speech. They just say, oh, it's your own limiting beliefs that's stopping you. Yes, that's still true, but there's a lot more work that goes into it. So I just wanted to sort of get your perspective on what you've seen with the team that you've worked in, building your own team in the coaching space. Because I feel like there is, as you said, there's so many names for it, and there's so many. It's either seen as something that's not attainable to everyone, or it's seen as the very big stereotype.
Yeah, and what you were saying there, for me, didn't sound like coaching. What it sounded like was someone, doing a bit of motivational speaking, or for me, coaching is finding out the needs of the individual. And there's a great quote in coaching which says the question is never the question. So the reason for coming to coaching is invariably, not the reason you came. And when you get down into it, and when you develop those trusting relationships where, if it's you, Charlie, you feel like you feel like I can challenge you in a way that is safe and allows you to explore a certain situation more deeply, or in a way that you've not thought about before, that creates a greater self-awareness and level of understanding. For me, that's a better description of what coaching is. The pomp and the shouting, that the motivation. I mean, there is an element of it which can be motivational, but yeah, it's so unique because it's so dependent on the individual, and there's not really any formula that you can turn up with and prepare for. There's obviously lots of skills that you learn as a coach in whatever format you do it, whether it's exec coaching, performance coaching, life coaching, that you can call upon, but really it's building a relationship where you feel in a safe enough space that you can be challenged to explore the things that you need to explore. And maybe that does sound a bit witchy woo woo, say it out loud, but it's the reality of it. And until you said it earlier, you don't know what you don't know, and I'm a prime example of that. Until I had a business coach and a life coach, I had both. I've also tried a therapist along the way. That I have to admit, that didn't work for me. But I wouldn't say it's not that therapy didn't work. I'm just saying that the individual that I tried didn't work for me. So there's another good thing to maybe think about if you're exploring coaching or therapy or whatever it is, and you have one experience and it's not what you think, actually try again, because it's about finding the right person for you is certainly my experience of it. And once you've had it, and once you've had a coach in your corner, like I had when I retired, I honestly don't know how you go through life without having it. It's like not having a coach in a rugby team, although some people will say you don't need a coach, the team can coach itself, which is, which when you get to a certain level is often true. But, what is a coach in a sports team? Really he's a facilitator to help the team understand what they're really good at so that they can deliver it themselves. And in some ways that's no dissimilar to what I do now.
I mean, 100%. I think, as one of my favorite things of my friends that do coaching and work in those spaces is, as you say, it's just about challenging some of the thought processes you have, some of the beliefs you've had, or maybe just helping you think about something in a different perspective. Like, one of my favorite things recently is a lot of my closer circle now are all older than me, but they give me such a different perspective than I would have thought. And then I sit there and go, this is one of the massive perks when your friendship group is slightly older, because they give you a completely different perspective. Luckily, the circle I'm in, they're all in different fields and different areas. So then that's kind of, for me, where I feel like I've got coaches without looking for a coach, because everyone brings a slightly different perspective. So there's, as you say, there's a lot of value for people seeking the support of coaches, therapists, and anyone out there, because as we keep saying, you only know you only know what you know, and you need someone to sometimes point in a different direction for you to realize, oh, actually this is where I want to go. But I 100% am with you with finding the right coaches and therapists and people that fit you, because if they don't, it will come apparent very quickly.
I don't know why I thought of this, but I mean, it's a well-known book, and Carol Dweck is a well-known individual. But the growth mindset is that's what it made me think of when you were talking about having a group of people around you, and that you were open enough to listen to people irrelevant of their age or background or experience, and taken on board, not as criticism or anything like that, but just as an experience to listen to and go, wow, okay, that's actually really interesting. So yeah, if it appeals to anyone, it's I would say I read it, but I'm an audiobook person, so I listen to most things now. And to be honest, I don't always get through the whole book. I get the bit out of it that I need, and I'm like, that is me done. I'm now.
I'm very similar. Being dyslexic, reading. These people that get the pleasure out of reading, I don't understand it. Give me an audiobook or a podcast any day of the week.
I'm with you 100% on that.
And lastly, I just want to ask the question that I ask every guest, which is, what's one piece of politically correctness that you really strongly agree with or disagree with?
Maybe it's something around ageism, as we were just talking about it, is like, the concept that, teenagers or someone over the age of 70 or 80 doesn't have any real, there's something about that there. We wouldn't ask them questions or advice. Some of the best learning I've ever had has been off my teenagers, because they make it so simple. You ask them a question and I've been overthinking something for ages and I can't get to and I just asked them a question. They're like, well, it's simple. Just do this. I was like, oh my God, can you be in every meeting that I ever have? And the same, and I think the same with people I work with. I work with a brilliant person who's been unbelievable for me in my new line of work, and he's into his 70s and still full of energy. He's got the buzz for life about him. He's still keen to learn, and there's something around when people get of a certain age that they just sort of get their knowledge, their information is less relevant. I'm like, oh my goodness, surely that. Maybe the younger version of me wouldn't have said this, but now I understand. It's like, oh, how can I glean the information from you? Because there is so much just being around him. Simon's his name. Just is a joy. So it'd be something about the wisdom of youth and the wisdom of age and embracing it.
100%. I think there's power in both. And I think the value of any good team you look at, whether it's in sport, whether it's in business, there's a variety of different people and different ages, because they all brings something different. Yes. Because, as I say, everyone's got a different perspective, and that's so important to grab hold of. And it's only something I've realized in the last 6 months. It's been like one of those, I keep sitting there going, I wouldn't. A year ago, I would never have sat there and listened to that, but here I am.
Oh, Charlie, on that age thing, it just got me thinking. And when you talked about motivation earlier in a different way, it just reminded me. I sit here. This is my office, and I look out the window most days, and there's a chap. So 11 years ago, I did the London Marathon, and in preparation, I used to see a guy run through the town a couple of times a week. He's got a really long ponytail. And I stopped him one day and asked him how old he was, and he says 73. And I was like, "Nee, you're 73. That is genuinely inspirational." He was like, "No, I just love running." I was like, "Well, how far do you run?" He was like, "Well, I run every week. I run probably a couple of marathons a week." I was like, "What? Just training?" He was like, "Yeah, just training." He was like, he runs a couple of marathons a week, just training. But he obviously was a runner of some sort.
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, why do you still, this sounds rude now I'm saying it out loud, but I asked him why he still does it. And he says, because I know if I stop doing it,
Yeah.
I won't be able to get going again.
Yeah.
And I still see him now. He's 83. Still see him running through town. Obviously the speed has changed, but he is still running. And there's something about always doing, you know, and staying fit and staying agile and, you know, not, I don't know, it's not caving into age, but it's just, you know, anything is possible. You know, if you, that's what he says to me. I just love watching him. And I still see him run past, and it makes me smile every day that I see him. I don't know why I shared that with you.
No, I love that, because I sit there and it's something I see quite often, like, because I, as a disabled individual, I've grown up in a wheelchair. So for me, like, the whole concept of using a wheelchair is fine. Like, it's fine. But then I've seen with a lot of elderly family members, elderly friends, there's like a reluctance to it. And I always say, and you kind of reiterated there with the guy that runs, it's like, if something's going to make your life better, whether that's running several marathons a day or whether that's doing, going and using a wheelchair or using a different piece of equipment, go ahead and do it, because otherwise, as you say, you're going to regress. So those people are the ones that just keep going and going and going. And you think, bloody hell, you're like 94 and still rocking and rolling.
And they've got so much energy as well. I love that. Yeah, that idea of just, you know, not seeing anything as a hurdle and just keep doing it. And he doesn't even see it as a big thing anyway. But Charlie, I've loved chatting to you, mate. I feel like we'd chat for about another 3 hours. I probably have waffled on for 3 hours already.
It's been an absolute pleasure. And also it's been a pleasure chatting to you and sort of getting your whole story. It's been super interesting, and thank you for being an amazing guest as well.
Pleasure, mate. Good luck with it all. Lovely to meet you.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Not Quite Podcast. Please make sure you follow us on TikTok and Instagram to get regular updates about the podcast. These